Audio test, audio test.
only trouble is I've now got one who's 60 more than half and full.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this formal board meeting of the Cairngorms National Park Authority. My name is Sandy Bremner, the board convener. This meeting is being live streamed, and a very warm welcome to members of the public who are watching or listening to our proceedings online. Thanks to the Highland Wildlife Park at Kincraig for hosting us today. This is another expression of the board's commitment to taking our meetings to communities around the national park. I'd like to start the meeting by noting the sad passing of Gregor Rimmel. Gregor sat on the board up until 2017 as a nominee of Highland Council. He was an excellent board member, providing an insight on a range of topics, especially those to do with access issues and all things Badenoch, and especially Newtonmore. He'll be missed, and I just want to put on record our thanks for all the work he did for the Cairngorms National Park. And today is the first meeting for Ian McLaren. Ian is the Angus Council nominee replacing Chris Beattie on the board. This is not Ian's first time on the board, so it's welcome back to the Park Authority. Ian will be sitting on the Audit and Risk Committee replacing Peter Cosgrove, and the Resources Committee replacing Chris. A very warm welcome, Ian. We have apologies today from Hannah Grist, Steve Micklewright and Derek Ross. I'll now ask the clerks to take a roll call.
Jeeva Blackett.
Yes, I'm here.
Sandy Bremner.
Morning.
Hello.
Peter Cosgrove.
Morning.
Kenny Deans.
Good morning.
Paul Gibb.
Here.
Russell Jones.
Morning.
John Kirk.
Morning.
Bill Lobbin.
Yeah.
Lauren McCallum.
Morning.
Eleanor McIntosh.
Here.
Ian McLaren.
Morning.
Fiona McLean.
Morning.
Duncan Miller.
Morning.
Anne Ross. And Michael Williamson.
Present.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 2, approval of minutes from previous meetings. Are there any points of accuracy on the minutes from the 27th of June 2025? Around the room, there are none. Thank you very much. Minutes approved. Item 3, matters arising not covered elsewhere. So action points from the meeting on the 22nd of March 2024. At paragraph 7.1, CEO to prepare a briefing note on farming activity and statistics within the Cairngorms National Park and distribute to the board. That we know is now completed. Action points from meeting on the 22nd of November 2024, paper 1 CEO report at paragraph 6b.1, review the planning call-in protocol and discuss the future planning committee. This is in hand. An informal discussion on call-in criteria has been scheduled after the last few planning committee meetings, but it's been deferred on each occasion due to pressure of time from other agenda items. The discussion has been reprogrammed to be held today after the formal board meeting. Paper 5, active Cairngorms and end of season visitor report at paragraph 23a.1. include key challenges in mitigation and learning in future papers. So this is to be included in the 2025 report. At paragraph 23c, statistics on campsite and luxury camping options within the national park. This is in hand, and just as an update for members, as there's no firm definition of luxury camping or glamping, and some premises can be listed as self-catering properties, the following is a best estimate from officers. The Park Authority subscribe to annual reports on the volume and value of tourism, which in turn use a database of premises in the area. This shows a total of 27 businesses listed as camping and or caravan sites. 21 of these businesses have further accommodation that is neither touring pitches nor caravans, and these are considered likely to be luxury camping properties, for example, wigwams, yurts, and even a train carriage. Action points from meeting on the 28th of March 2025, paper 2, the 2025-26 budget and operational plan. At point 1, information on the number of ecological barriers that are being removed on catchments to be sought and circulated to the board, and consideration to be given to putting these into a staff member's forward work plan. This is in hand. And point 2, scope of extending the work on species management, specifically geese, further up the Spey into Badenoch to be investigated. This is in hand. Updates on those. On the first point, information is being sought for the number of ecological barriers that are being removed on catchments, but it's not yet available. This is one of the indicators in the Cairngorms Nature Index. It will be shared with the board when it's available. Regarding geese, there's been little or no demand from farmers out with the current area to extend the goose control scheme. Additional factors in considering extension have been capacity and practicalities in the contractor network. Also, high kill rates of geese are not directly translating to high reductions in numbers on control sites. This could indicate that resident grey lags are filling the control areas and so having an effect on the wider area, or that there is more interchange between resident and migratory geese. This needs more time to establish. Action points from meeting on the 27th of June 2025, paper 1 CEO report at paragraph 6c, point 1, clerks to the board to share to the board portal the minutes from the group meetings that board members sit on. This is in hand, and again, as an update, advisory group meeting minutes that have been approved have been loaded to the website and linked to the board site. Outstanding advisory group minutes will be added following the approval of the minutes at the next meeting. Moving on now to item 4, declarations of interest. None have been received in advance. Are there any declarations of interest? None. And again, with regard to item 5, paper 1, members are asked to note the provisions set out in the board memo for the meeting, which takes us to papers. And item 5, the first paper, the CEO report and convener update. This is for information. It's introduced by Grant Moyer, our Chief Executive Officer. Grant.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Sandy. So just to highlight a couple of areas within this. So first up is just on the fire management side. So just say there's a number of meetings happening on that at the moment. Colin McLean, our head of land management, was at the SFRS debrief meeting yesterday. I have a meeting coming up with all the public sector partners in early October. And then there is now a wildfire summit on the 14th of October as well. That's a ministerial-led initiative, and that is likely to be at a venue within the national park. We're just working at the moment on that as to exactly where that venue will be. So that's what's happening in terms of all the different work that's coming off the back of the Dava Carbridge fire or fires. So we'll know a bit more once we're into mid-October as to what the next steps are and a number of the different bits that we're looking at across the fire management side of things. Obviously, the other thing is you'll all have seen, which is that the fire bylaws were approved by ministers on Wednesday, and we now have that in the public domain. So there's a lot of work that will be going forward on that around both the training side with the Rangers, all the different things, and the signage and comm side of things as well. We've just appointed people to do that work within the national park. So we're full steam ahead in terms of all the work we need to do for implementation from the 1st of April next year. Obviously, a big bit of work leading up to that for the whole team as we look to take forward that work. But it's really good news. That's been a couple of years worth of work by lots of people and the board as well, looking at all the different options, lots and lots of support from people around that, and it's really good to see that now being taken forward. And also there are a number of other councils having a look at what we're doing in the national park as well, and looking at whether they can take that forward within their own areas as well. So that's really good to see what's happening on that. Just a couple of other, actually one of the other fire related things is just to say that our messaging around fire is starting to have, I think, a bit of an impact out there. So you'll see in number 8 that we have seen some drop around the numbers of fires being lit within the national park, and that is, we've done a lot of work this year on trying to get that message out. So it's good to see, and obviously that will be reinforced by the bylaw as well. The next part was just to give a quick indicator on the local development plan side of things. There's been a lot of work done on the evidence report side. The last of those consultations is out at the moment. That means that we will have completed that work, and we'll be looking to take the evidence report to the board for sign off to put to the reporters unit in November is when we're going to take it to the board at the next meeting. That'll be a key point. Just to say though, at the moment, the pass rate for local authorities going forward at the evidence stage is 45% in Scotland. So at the moment, quite a lot of those evidence reports getting put in are being refused, I think is the way to put it from the reporter, and asked to do more work on them. So just to be warned that that's where we're at in terms of the system within Scotland at the moment. And then finally, just to say, one of the things that's coming up very shortly is the Cultural Heritage Network event on the 9th of October in Boat Hall. We've got, I think, I was the other day, I think it was over 40 people had already signed up for that. So that's really good to see that coming together as well within the national park. I think that's all I was wanting to flag up from the report, but more than happy to take any questions on any of the report.
Thank you, Grant. Just on the bylaws issue, and on behalf of the board, I'd like to welcome the Cabinet Secretary's approval. This is another example of the board and the National Park Authority gripping an issue of huge importance to our communities and to everything we're trying to achieve, and delivering on our promise to act. We listened carefully through successive consultations, shaping a bylaw that now has overwhelming public support. It won't remove the risk of wildfires, nothing can do that, but it will reduce the threat, along with all the other measures we've introduced, including the UK's first integrated wildfire management strategy. In doing that, it will help save lives and livelihoods and protect the incredible natural heritage we're committed to preserving and restoring. I'd like to pay tribute to everyone who's helped us reach this point, and thanks to everyone who'll help by heeding the bylaw in the years to come. It will now go to comments and questions on these papers, and I have one from Jeeva Blackett.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I've got 4 points. The first is on the game bird management. And you say the next step is to investigate what the impacts of these releases are, both positive and negative, on the biodiversity of the Cairngorm. I wonder if we'll also be taking an economic impact as well of that. Moving on to the ranger services on item 8. I wonder if the local authority rangers were involved, and if so, I hope Aberdeenshire turned up. Number 11, on the local development plan, we're talking about water management, and we were in Strathdon the other day where the water supplies are drying up. So I just wonder if people are actually going to pick up on that, and if we can encourage people with private water supplies to engage with that. And then finally, on number 16, Pledge Process Planet Exhibition, I hadn't heard it was coming to Braemar. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Yes. So in terms of those different points, so the game bird management side, we're just looking at what the next step is on that. Most of the work that's been done on impacts of game birds has been done in the south of England, which is why we look at something specifically Cairngorm's related on that, because obviously what happens in the south of England and what the land is like in the north is quite different. But we'll be looking at the socio-economic side of that as well. We'll look at that. In terms of the ranger service side, it was of all the ranger services that were within the national park. I do not know off the top of my head whether Aberdeenshire Council, I don't know, I think Gav thinks they were, but we can check on that one. I don't know off the top of my head. And LDP, yeah, I mean, it's a good place to engage with the water management side of things in terms of what we're doing in the park. But obviously, water management will be a big part of the next park plan as well. So we can, between those two documents, we can see what we're doing in terms of long-term water supplies within the park, obviously being affected by climate change and such like. And I think those are the main ones.
Thank you. Questions from Jackie Brereton, followed by Bill Lobbin. Jackie.
Thank you, convener. I just wanted to comment and ask a question around the comms website and social media, item 19 and then 20 as well. I think the new website is brilliant. It's a great credit to the Park Authority, and it's got lots of really useful information. I thought one area that perhaps was weaker was to talk a bit about some of the businesses that are operating in the park, and perhaps to feature some case studies of the businesses that have benefited from park developments and grant funding, etc. Because I think getting the balance that, you know, entrepreneurship and business is a huge part of park activity. It would be great to have some of that in there. And the other thing I thought was missing, and I know this is a really difficult one because there's a lack of room, but we've got such a fantastic staff team across the Park Authority, but none of them are mentioned apart from the 4 wonderful senior directors. Is there a way that you could feature more of the people, even the heads of different parts of the park team, and contact details so that people feel that they can engage more easily with the team on the CNPA? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the first point, in terms of case studies around the business side of things, yeah, more than happy to look at that. I mean, we've got some really good stuff coming out around the use of the Climate Adaptation Fund by businesses, and the case studies around that. So we can certainly look at doing more of that, and we can look at how we can use the website to do more of that. So I'm more than happy to look at that, and I can chat with Ollie about that. The staff team side of things, there's actually a whole cybersecurity part around that, about putting details on websites. We used to have the details of staff on the website, and as part of our cybersecurity credential side of things, we were asked to not put those on the website because it's the easiest way for people to then use that to hacking and things like that. So it's a balance. So what we've moved to is generic email addresses where people, if they put it into like the access team, it then goes to all the people within the access team. So that's the way we've done it. But that's the reason why there isn't all the details as there used to be on our website. But I'll have a think about that in terms of how we can do that. It's trying to get the balance right between those two things.
I think it's just reflecting for people that are looking at the website. They don't get a sense of the depth of the team and the skills and expertise on it.
We can certainly put up something about who does what, whether they have I don't think we put up their contact details, but we can certainly put up an organogram or whatever it is of who does what within the organisation. Yeah.
Thank you. Bill Lobbin.
A number of the community councils that I attend regularly have basically stated that the consultation in the LDP is too complicated, too big, etc., for them to adequately comment on. They are unpaid volunteers, and there's a huge amount of work in actually even just reading through it. So it's just to point out the fact that maybe the lack of response is more down to what we've been giving them rather than what they've been responding to.
Yeah. So to be clear on that, I have a lot of sympathy for that viewpoint. That the current evidence report stage is really about us gathering all the evidence to allow us to do the bit that I would hope that the community would then engage with. So that the next stage, which is when we actually have, we are looking at where we are allocating places, what the policies might be, all these sorts of things are the bits where I would hope that it would be much easier for communities to engage in those parts than the current evidence report part, which I think is difficult for people to engage with. But there's a format that we have to follow and a process, and I'm afraid to say that's how it's been set out. So we are slightly hamstrung in terms of the current part, but the next part I think is the crucial bit where we need to make sure that communities are engaged as much as possible.
Maybe we would be better to tell communities that then, so that they can expect what's coming forward to be of more use to them.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. I think what we can do is, now that we are at the end, once we're at the end of these consultation bits on the evidence report, we'll be taking it to the board. At the same time, we can write out to community councils to give them an indication of the timeline for the development of the next part, and we can say when we expect to be able to engage on the key things, which is what people want to know is what land is going to be allocated around their villages to do what, and how they can engage in whether they are in favour or not of those allocations, which is the key bit. So we can do that in November when we're at that stage.
Thank you. Eleanor McIntosh.
Yeah, just on the same point, I totally agree with what Bill's saying, and I just wonder if there's any way, or should we be feeding back to government that their new procedure for LDP consultation is proving detrimental? Because I'm like Bill, I'm already getting feedback, you know, consultation overkill, and when it comes to the real thing that we want people to engage with, I think we'll have turned them off. We've already lost them. And I think we should be feeding that back strongly.
Yeah, more than happy to do that, Eleanor.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the paper? Duncan Miller.
Thanks. It's on 4A, just on the beavers. The annual survey that's just been completed, are the results of that survey, are they going to be fed back, and it's going to be like areas of like high risk, and what is kind of the overall goal of that kind of the survey to help identify, you know, for
I'll ask Andy Ford to respond to that point. I can thank.
Yeah, apologies, Duncan. I'm just catching up a bit there. So for the survey, is it going to be made public?
No. Yeah. So the survey is going to be discussed at the beaver mitigation group. That they've already had a conversation around the high impact areas and the work we're doing around that. So that's all been already had discussion, but there'll be a follow-up discussion at the next meeting as well around exactly that and about the survey results. Yep.
Thank you. Russell Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just on fire management, are we any further forward with the community asset register for Beinoch and Strathspey? I think Colin had been doing some work on that and maybe wasn't as strong in Beinoch and Strathspey as it was in Aberdeenshire, I think.
No, that's correct. It was much stronger on D-side than it is elsewhere. That was raised at the debrief yesterday, run by the fire service over the Dava fire, and there's an acceptance that the community asset register is not working particularly well, and they need to really do quite a lot of work in it, which they're going to do. So it's an action point for us. We have been speaking to the Strathspey commander, and we will continue to work on that. But there's a much bigger action point for the fire service to improve the whole working of the community asset register.
Thank you, Lauren McCallum.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I guess just on number 8, really encouraged to see those numbers coming down, and just on some of the social media, good to see that our engagement is up. And I've seen some of the content around some of the other English national parks using, I guess, branding agencies to put out some quite specific sort of scientific but kind of made fun content around how fires are started. I'm not sure if anyone's seen the guy that put the 2 sprinklers in the peaty soil and described how when a fire started over here, how it spreads. Anyways, the post went viral and it did really, really well. I know that was done through 1% for the Planet, and I wonder, there's a question of, is there scope for us to investigate doing that as a national park, because it was really good, and I'd love to see us to do some of that.
All easy. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. Yes, that was actually, that exact example was included in our fire bylaw messaging framework that went to an agency. So yeah, rest assured we're on that particular piece. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other points on the paper? None. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, paper 2, revision of planning committee standing orders. So this is for decision. The board is being asked to approve and adopt the updated planning committee standing orders set out in Annex 1 to this paper. And for background, the standing orders have already been approved after extensive discussion by board members meeting as the Park Authority's Planning Committee. The board itself is now required to approve changes to standing orders, so hopefully this will be a formality. The paper will be introduced briefly by David Berry, Head of Planning and Chief Planning Officer, and Gavin Miles, Director of Planning and Place. David.
Thank you, Convener. So yes, this paper seeks formal approval and adoption of the proposed updates to the Planning Committee standing orders. And likewise, I don't propose to say too much by way of introduction to the paper because of the level of consideration and the fact that planning committee have essentially already looked at this in detail and agreed updates to the standing orders at the committee meeting on the 29th of August. And essentially the purpose of this paper is just to enable those agreed updates to be brought into effect through formal endorsement by the board, which is effectively the final stage in that review process. So the proposed updated committee standing orders, which include all of the updates agreed by planning committee, presented in Annex 1 to the paper. That's what we're obviously seeking approval for. And Table 1 in the covering report provides a sort of brief summary of the proposed updates under each section of the standing orders. Although I'm not going to say too much more about the proposed updates, as members will be familiar with those at this stage, it is perhaps worth just confirming that the specific changes that the committee requested at their meeting on the 29th of August have been incorporated into the final version of the document. And those changes in particular include a single tier approach of making attendance at all planning site visits a mandatory requirement for members. And then a minor change to ensure that the minutes of committee meetings will record instances where amendments to officer recommendations have been proposed but not seconded during a meeting. So subject to board approval, the updated standing orders would be brought into effect and now apply then for future meetings of the planning committee, next of which is scheduled to take place on the 14th of November. And maybe also just worth mentioning that we have a planning site visit to arrange ahead of that committee meeting. We're just finalising the arrangements for that, but that would also be subject to the new arrangements in terms of member attendance as well. But that's what I was going to say, Convener, by way of introduction. Happy to take any questions if there are any at this time.
Thank you very much. So comments or questions on the paper. Eleanor McIntosh.
Yeah, I know we've thrashed this to death and everybody's sick of them and we give it a good airing. But one point in paragraph 2 is still kind of frustrating me, where we talked about etiquette with hybrid meetings. And I think it's weak to say that, I think it's line 3, members shall have their cameras switched on wherever possible when attending hybrid meetings. I would like to see it, as I know it is in some councils, that your camera has to be on or you're deemed not to be there when it comes to the decision making. That was my only comment. Otherwise, I'm content with the amendment.
Members, are there any thoughts on that point? Chiva Blackett.
Yeah, thank you. I hear what Eleanor's saying, but if I have 2 meetings going on in the same house, in other words, if Simon is having a meeting upstairs, our broadband does not allow 2 of us to have cameras on. So it's not always possible.
Bill Lobbin.
I actually agree with Eleanor. I think, well, and certainly in Highland Council, if you're in a planning committee meeting, you have to keep your camera on, because if you don't, there is no way of assessing whether you've listened to all of the debate. So I think what Eleanor's suggesting is quite sensible and quite logical.
Thank you. Mike Williamson.
I absolutely agree with what Jiva's saying, I'm afraid. If you've got, in my instance, 3 people in the house working, your broadband can be suspect, and if your camera goes off, it doesn't mean that you're not paying attention, and it doesn't mean that you're not listening. And that comes down to me, to ethics. It comes down to me, to personal responsibility, and we've got to allow some personal responsibility. Thanks.
John McCallum.
I can sympathise with both points of view, but I feel like we can't be faceless bureaucrats, and I feel like we need to be able to be seen. Yeah, I guess my point is that I think people have to be able to have their camera on. And if broadband issues it is difficult. I know living rurally is difficult, but maybe there needs to be some planning around that.
Thank you, Mike Williamson.
Yeah, I agree with both Anna and Jeeva. I mean, when you live in a rural area, the broadband can be a bit suspect at time, and it can drop in and out. And probably the easiest way to get through a meeting is actually by turning your camera off, just to try and save bandwidth. It's not about trying to avoid a meeting. And I think just by your participation within that meeting, asking questions, I think surely that should be enough to guarantee that people are paying attention and participating in the meeting. But I am concerned that if we do drive this through, there will be people out there who will not be able to participate in the meeting because of broadband width.
Steve Micklewright.
Yeah, same point really, unless BT ever managed to put decent fibre to where I live in a remote rural area. Sometimes I don't have good connectivity. I'll try and keep my camera on for sure, but if it means having the camera on means I actually can't hear the debate because I've lost bandwidth because you're just so busy trying to look at my beautiful face, then you know, it's really silly, to be honest with you. We'll do our best, of course we will, those of us that are joining remotely, but there's a fact of trusting each other and believing that we all follow the rules. And as I said last time, it's perfectly possible to blink out in a meeting when you're all sat round together, as it is if you're online. It's a false argument, I'm afraid, Eleanor.
Duncan Miller.
Yeah, I do have sympathy with, you know, the broadband thing. I've not got great broadband. I've had to fork out for the Starlink thing, which has vastly improved my internet quite a lot. And I don't think it's a case of anybody's pointing fingers and saying nobody's, you know, I think we've got a good board here. I think we all have respect for each other. I think it's more public perception that can be the difficult thing here. So I would probably agree with Eleanor and Lauren on her points there.
Right, any other comments on this point? Right, there clearly is a range of opinion and divided opinion on the board. There are genuine technical problems occasionally, but there is a clear wish, I think, by everybody on this board that those taking part in meetings be seen to be visible. So I look to the chair of the planning committee for thoughts on this, but can we proceed on the presumption that all members will, in every possible circumstance, be visible at meetings and make non-visibility an absolute exception? Russell Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally, I mean, I absolutely agree with Eleanor. I think, and it is about public perception, as Lauren said. However, obviously, I do sympathise with people who don't have great bandwidth. I mean, I don't know, is there anything that we can do to have people get to a place? I mean, even if they can't come to Grantown, you know, can they be in a place where they have better bandwidth and closer to their home? I mean, is there something in that? You know, if we're on planning committee and we're attending a meeting, you know, back a few years ago, you would have had to come to the meeting. Now we do have this hybrid situation. So if you don't have good enough bandwidth in your house, or someone else is using the broadband in your house, is there somewhere else you can go, you know, to a public office close by to use that? I mean, is that a possibility? To put that to the people who are against this?
Just to explain my situation, sometimes my internet is great, some days it's awful, and I don't know why, it's just the way it is. I've gone to satellite broadband now, or whatever it is, EE or whatever it's called. That's made it slightly better. It's just one day it's fine, one day it's not, and I suspect others have the same issue. You can't predict it because it's not a constant technical issue. It's just something to do with bandwidth, not even necessarily my house. It's just lots of people using the system, I think. So you can't predict it, or at least that's what I find.
Grant Moyer.
Just to try and find a compromise this, because we would just change the word and say, to ensure the effective operation of hybrid meetings, members shall have their cameras switched on, and then just put in brackets after that, unless there is a technical reason why that is not possible at that meeting. So it's that it is to have it on if you can, but if there is some reason why, I don't know, it drops out halfway through and you can only get you only hear the end of a planning application with your camera off. I think that should be okay for us. There needs to be some sort of a little bit of flexibility in the system, I would suggest.
I'm seeing nods around the room to that, and perhaps to add to that where there are technical issues, we do have technical staff who are in a position to render advice. If we could proceed on that basis. Thank you very much. Are there?
Well, I mean, should we go back to the people who raised it in the first place? Go back to Eleanor and see if she's content with that, and others.
Not really, but I mean, if that's the will of the people around the table, fine. But I just think there's an onus. We're being paid to be the public face, take decisions about planning that are really important to people. I think the onus is on us to be in a position where you can be seen, whether it is in your own home or whether you have, as Russell says, to go somewhere else to be able to be visible. I know my broadband at home is rubbish, and when I was planning convener, there's no way I could have done a planning committee at home. I had to go to Granton every meeting, but I took the view that I was being paid for that position, so I turned up. But that's my personal position on it. But if it's the
I
one
think
the
that
board,
by everybody, the onus is to be seen and to take every possible measure to be seen. Thank you very much. Are there any other points on the paper? Paul Ginn.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm hesitated about whether I should just raise this, but first of all, thank you very much for the amendment that was made to point 29 following a discussion we had at the planning meeting, that an unsupported amendment will be minuted. But in the following point, I thought I was trying to make a general principle about minuting the meeting and the decisions, how we arrive at that decision. But the following point 30, an amendment may be withdrawn by the mover if the seconder agrees such an amendment will not be inserted in the minutes. And I'm not preparing to push this point, but I was really just making an observation on consistency around minuting something which is quite significant. Putting forward an amendment and someone seconding it, even though it's been withdrawn, would be my preference, but I won't make a move on it. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other points? None, in which case, thank you very much. Is the board content to approve and adopt the updated planning committee standing orders as set out in Annex 1 to this paper? Thank you very much. Agreed. We move on to item 7, paper 3, National Park Partnership Plan Annual Update. So this is for information. The board is being asked to note the progress summarised in the paper and associated Annex 1. The paper summarises the monitoring framework for the partnership plan and identifies some of the key areas where indicators show progress or where officers expect progress to be demonstrated in future after the third year of delivery of the plan. As you'll have seen, good progress has been made in most areas. The paper is introduced by Gavin Miles, Director of Planning in Place. Gavin.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, again, I'm not going to say a lot about this because the paper is quite short and the annex should be fairly clear. When we took this paper to you last year, we didn't provide as much information in the annex around the red, amber, green status of the different objectives. And so we tried to provide a richer sense of overall progress. I've explained in the paper that this supplements the other information that the board get and the committees get over the year, and that we provide through CEO reports over the year as well, which provides a lot more detail on individual parts of it. And this paper is intended to be an overview of the entire plan to give you that sense of progress across the entire thing. The single objective that has been classed as red is that one around the population profile, which, as members know, is incredibly difficult to directly influence. Birth rates, death rates, and
the trends of migration inside and outside the park all play a part in that. The key things that we are doing to try to help that are really around strengthening the economy and on housing, which is one of those critical factors in that. So the availability of housing for people of a working age is one of the most important things there. And there is significant progress, albeit in very challenging areas, in those things. And clearly, there are many parts of the partnership plan which are going extremely well as well, on some of the more easily controlled, I suppose, parts of it.
Thank you very much. Are there questions or comments? The paper, Jeeva Blackett.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add, because that was the working age people objectives was the one that I picked up on. I think everybody will have done, and I think childcare is a huge issue, and we should be aware that it's impossible. We depend so much on tourism and hospitality. And when a tourist's coming, they're coming in the holidays. And that's, if you haven't got childcare, you're stuck. And that's going to hit right through the economy. So if we can just put that into our thinking, please. I don't know what the solution is, but we need to consider that.
Thank you very much. Mike Williamson, followed by Fiona McLean. Mike.
I think Jeeva partially asked my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Fiona.
Thank you, convener. I like the format with the RAG rating. I particularly like the arrows that are being used in it. Just a couple of things I wanted to raise. And it's going back to the working age population one. It's 12AB1. I cannot help but feel that this objective is in some ways beyond our remit, and that careful consideration needs to be given for the next partnership plan if we actually really want to retain it. And if we do, I suggest that we measure it against the proportion of young and working age population maintained relative to comparable areas of Scotland. I think that's a much better way of approaching it. So that was just a wee suggestion there. And my second one was on 13A, B4 skills and training. And I know we've had some discussions about green jobs and whether we should actually be calling them green jobs. And again, that's maybe something we need to reconsider for the next partnership plan. Because for this one, it occurred to me that we should also be including traditional skills such as dry stain dyke building, older house stock renovation, and that kind of thing as well, because that's equally important in terms of that agenda. So just some thoughts now that we're thinking about the next partnership plan about how we approach that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, and yesterday Jackie Brereton was chairing the Economic Steering Group, where one of the discussion points was explicitly about skills and training and the kind of the gaps that happen in the national park. So we had a really helpful discussion with the different parties there, many of whom are the big agencies who do skills and training development across all of Scotland. So we are trying to progress that. We have identified a few key areas where we think there are gaps that we can do something useful in the national park on. But it is worth saying that all of those other organisations have really big courses and programmes that do work within the national park as well.
Thank you. John Kirk.
Just on that transport, the bus service is still atrocious if they appear. And we still need to sort out this train times and bus times so that it works to suit people who actually work in the villages. And there's still the cycle paths that are needing sorted out. Aviemore, Carbridge, Dullin and Granton one, and the Speyside Way at Nethy, still lots of complaints. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Gavin.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And obviously Park Authority and others are doing work on all of those projects, although the Aviemore Car Bridge project is a Transport Scotland lead one and is tied to the development of the A9 as well. So while we appreciate that people want it now, it is only going to happen when that section of the A9 comes forward.
Understood. Thank you. Russell Jones.
Yeah, thanks. Just on John's point there, I think we maybe mentioned it before, but obviously John was talking about transport problems in Beinoch and Strathspey probably as opposed to the whole part, but there is a Beinoch and Strathspey Transport Forum that has had an inaugural meeting, and this first meeting is in early October now, I think. So, and it will be looking to address all these problems, and the park will be involved in that as well.
Thanks for making that point. And Chiva Blackett.
Yeah, thank you, convener. So just to come in on John's point, the situation in Deeside has improved because we now have a new bus route that comes from Aberdeen and it goes all the way through Aboyne, Ballater, Braemar, over Glenshee, down to Blairgowrie to Dundee. And by all accounts, it's well used and it's made a lot of difference. So that's a good news story. I think that they're called Embler or something. Yeah, they're very good.
Excellent. Always good to hear any news on the transport front. Peter Cosgrove.
Thank you. It's really picking up a sort of a theme from what Fiona said, and it was just about the objectives and under A14, which is the nature objective. This is for future. It's just an observation. I'd like us to be thinking a bit about increasing the quality of peatland work and woodland regeneration, not just the quantity. And so for future, if we can not just have purely area-based metrics on quantity, I think we would be doing biodiversity a lot better if we thought about that kind of thing. So, thanks.
Thank you. Fiona McLean.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually going to raise this at the next item, but because Pete's just raised that, I think for the next partnership plan, we need to be thinking. The tendency is to use qualitative indicators, for evidence for our whether or not we are achieving our objectives. But there are times when really we need to be looking more at the quantitative indicators. Very difficult to do, but I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's quality, not quantity, and we need to be thinking more about how we can address that in the work that we do. I hope that made sense.
Thank you. Bill Lobbin.
It's on C4, which is villages and town centres. We keep mentioning 20-minute neighbourhoods, which in all honesty, in rural areas like this, is absolute nonsense. Really need to go away from it. It's a government policy, 20-minute neighbourhoods, obviously designed for the Central Belt, doesn't work in the Highlands.
Gavin.
Yes, Bill, and you will remember there were lots of discussions about that when we created this National Park Partnership Plan. The LDP and the evidence process has actually now started to develop a methodology that looks at both 20-minute walking distances to key services in the communities where that makes sense. That can now start to be used in terms of both cycling and driving as well, and the driving part of it is actually more relevant to some of the more remote communities where people are used to travelling, and as they have electric vehicles as well, that will become less of a problem in terms of carbon emissions, and it will, it is an essential part of some rural living as well.
Thank you. John Kirk, followed by Ross.
Two things. 20-minute communities, I think we're 50 years too late. You can go back to 50 years ago, Nettie had its bakers, its Coop, clothes shops. Granting you could buy everything from a Morris Minor to a full clothing outfit. You can't do that today. Just on this charging thing, I see we have a new charging thing in Nettie, but it seems to be more broken down than going. What is there any reason why this is happening? Does anybody know? It seems to have plastic bags on it all the time.
So is that car charging?
Car charging. That one was done with BMW.
Right. Don't know the details. Obviously, it's BMW are the owner, and then so it is really between the the owner and BMW, but we can find out more. But I guess all of the BMW car charging facilities that have been installed partly through the UK National Parks project are relatively new, so there may be teething problems with any of them at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Russell Jones.
Yeah, thanks. It was just about the 75% target of affordable housing, Gab. I mean, I think that's absolutely, very laudable target and fantastic, but is it actually achievable? Is it relevant? And do we run the risk of developers not coming to work in the national park because they absolutely can't make money at 75% affordable housing? So, I mean, it's all very well having these figures, but if we're never going to reach it, should we not be talking to developers and saying, what is achievable? What's the number? What's the figure? And if that's 45%, 50%, let's just hang our hat on that and say that's what we're going for instead of the 75%, which from talking to developers, they don't seem to think it's possible.
Yeah, that target, it would not be possible for most developers to do on their own, but it wasn't intended to be simply that we were going to use the market to do this. This requires massive investment from the public sector to reach those targets, and the public sector. So the range of actions identified in the partnership plan include looking at the public sector and communities taking more ownership of land around their communities to develop housing on them. But yes, it is extremely challenging, and developers won't want to go. Developers will always want to make as much profit as possible. The good news is that in some places we know that developers have looked and they are able to increase their affordable housing proportion of a development up towards 50% at times in some of the places, whilst still being able to cover their basic profit margin and not making a lot of money, but still covering that. So that is good. But that additional bit requires public sector to be in control of land and investing in it to make it happen.
Thank you. With Kenny Deans followed by Anne Ross. Kenny.
Thanks, Convener. Just to go back, Gavin touched on it, and Fiona mentioned it as well, the population figures and how that's managed and kept. Excuse me. I think it's really important that we hang on to these demographic figures, and I think any comparison should be on, on our population in the last 15, 20, 35 years, because we have kind of defended population figures in the sense that we're bucking the rural trend and managing to sustain a population, but we're not bucking the trend in demographics. And we know that from primary school rolls and such. And that is I think that's a bit of a crisis. And although we're bullish periodically and talk about communities being vibrant and dynamic, I'm not sure that's necessarily reflected if you look at some of these fairly stark figures in a lot of the primary schools that still remain open across the national park. And I think that is a priority for us. I know it's not something we can hugely impact, but it's something we should be absolutely honest and aware of and seeking to do more. And I know we're doing that through the housing targets, but I just don't want to lose sight of that issue as a big issue rather than just saying, oh, the population is stable within the park. That's true, but that's not the key bit of active economic workers.
Thanks, Kerry. I mean, there really are very significant challenges here, as I think are reflected in our responses. Anne Ross.
Thank you. It goes back to the comment Gavin made about the public sector, and my question. Well, first of all, a comment. I read that Highland Council are leading the way, I think, with house building, aren't they, in Scotland? However, can the public sector afford to be building the houses that we're wanting?
Well, Highland Council have been very successful in getting lots of money and are investing their own money and are borrowing money in order to invest in housing because they see it as critical to the health of the Highlands. Other councils maybe less so, but if other councils with, I suppose, more remote parts within them want those communities to continue, then they will also need to invest in those locations in order to provide housing for people to live there as well.
comment is because the public sector in Scotland is absolutely broke, and the money is, I mean, I know about HRAs and all the rest of it, but money is just not around at the moment.
I suppose I can't really comment on the different priorities that different councils have for their budgets. I know that we have experience with Highland Council where they have invested not just in Badenach and Strathspey, but in other parts of the Highlands as well, because that's seen as critical to the health of the economy.
Bill Lobbin on that point.
So basically, Highland Council have taken the decision that house building is a fundamental requirement for the economic prosperity of the Highlands. And I can't talk about, obviously, the rest of the councils in Scotland, but it has become our main priority is the provision of housing, because without the provision of housing, you cannot see progression in the huge amount of economic development that's coming forward. So it's actually driven not just by the council, but it's driven by economic development. And if you don't have that level of economic development, then obviously it's going to be really difficult for other councils to fulfil your house building requirements. Ours is specifically, I suppose, targeted to economic development.
Thank you, Bill. Jackie Brereton.
Thank you. Just coming back on the points that have been made about the people objectives and the working age population. And I think connecting that with the skills issues as well, because I think if we've got a strong skills and training, a set of strong skills and training and development opportunities visible in the park, that will help to both retain and recruit people or encourage people to come into the park. One of the discussions that we had at the meeting that Gavin referenced yesterday, the Economic Steering Group meeting, was looking at the demographics of the park in more detail. And one example we looked at was the fact that there's a disproportionate number of over 50s living in the park. And if we look at national economic inactivity statistics, more than 50% of economically inactive people in Scotland are over 50. And that's sometimes obviously for obvious reasons that people don't want to be active. But actually there's quite a percentage of those who could be encouraged to either take up employment or part-time employment, or to set up their own businesses. And there's some pilot programs happening at the moment around supporting older entrepreneurship. So it's really just to make the point that I think it's really important that we have this in the partnership plan to use it to encourage all our partners to think about the opportunities that they could develop in order for us to achieve these objectives.
Thank you very much for that, Jackie. Are there any other comments on the paper? None. Thank you very much, and thanks for really thoughtful feedback on that. So is the board content to note the progress summarised in the paper and associated Annex 1? Thank you very much, board, and thank you, Gavin. Moving on to item 8, paper 4, National Park Partnership Plan 2027-2032 timetable. Now this is for decision. The board's being invited to agree the timetable for the development of the plan. Now obviously the paper effectively fires the starting gun on what will be one of the biggest and most important pieces of work we've got to deliver as a board. It provides an initial timetable for the development of the 2732 plan. The first board discussion session will be held next month on the 12th of October, subject to approval today. The paper is introduced by Grant Moyer.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that long since we were approving the last National Park Partnership Plan, but here we are once again. So obviously there's some key things that are set out in that we have to have the new park plan in 2027. We've got to do that on a 5-yearly basis. That's set out in the legislation, and the legislation also sets out what that's got to cover. And as part of that, we've also got to do a formal, at some point, 12-week consultation on the draft plan. So that's all set out in the National Parks Act and what we've got to do around that. The way that we're looking at that is that we are working back from a March date for the board to formally approve the National Park Partnership Plan in 2027, which means that we'll be looking at a formal public consultation in the autumn of 2026, which means we've got about the next roughly speaking, year to develop that National Park Partnership Plan in terms of what that looks like, what we want to continue from the current National Park Partnership Plan, which is lots of targets that go out to 2045 and beyond, what tweaks we want to make and what things that maybe weren't such a big thing 5 years ago that we want to put into the park plan now, and what things we might want to drop out because we don't think that that's something that we want to focus on in the next 5 years. So those are the big things. The key thing is to always remember that this is a plan for the place. It's not a plan for the authority specifically. It's as much for all the other public agencies that work within the national park. And obviously we have a bill going through Parliament at the moment, which, if it becomes an act, does strengthen that from have regard to facilitate the implementation of when it comes to the National Park Partnership Plan. So it has greater strength within statute if that bill becomes an act, and we'll know about that long before we get to the point of actually consulting on the plan. So what we've put in place today is really just a timetable about how we want to take that forward. One of the key things for us, and I think we can speak this, which is that there's been a lot of consultation done over the past 2 or 3 years on a whole load of different topics, through Cairngorms 2030, through resident surveys, visitor surveys, lots of information gathered for the LDP. We do not want to add to the consultation fatigue around this, so we want to be really targeted about what we're doing on the engagement side, going out and talking to people. We have to do that 12-week consultation. There's no way around that. That bit is there, and there will always be the formal part. But we want to build on the evidence base we've had rather than go out and ask people the same questions that we've asked them fairly recently again. So slightly different to where we were probably 5 years ago when we were doing the last park plan, where we did a lot of the there was a sort of pre-consultation consultation. We're going to be slightly more nuanced about that this time in terms of going out. The other bit, which is just to think about, and I'm not trying to look for any answers today, is what action plans we want to flow out on the other side of the National Park Partnership Plan, and what groups we want to have set up. We've got things like Cairngorms Nature, or the Economic Action Plan, or the tourism side of things. Are those the right things we want for the next 5 years as well, or do we want to see any tweaks in that? And we want to see any tweaks in the groups that we have below the National Park Partnership Plan as well. Again, I'm not saying that's for today. The key thing for me is around when we're thinking about the park plan is what is the investment that we're going to need to be able to deliver this, and how can we try and make sure that investment comes through? How do we get good buy-in from stakeholders to that plan? And yeah, as I said, the consultation fatigue is probably the other part. Just to say, the last thing is how this ties in with the LDP. Because obviously those are two big bits of work, both of which need formal consultations on them. The National Park Partnership Plan will come first, the Local Development Plan consultation will come after the National Park Partnership Plan. That works quite well because obviously the LDP is meant to flow from the National Park Partnership Plan, so that sort of sequencing works well for us in terms of how that will work publicly as well. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a quick counter through where we are on the timetable. And then we'll obviously use sessions throughout the next year with the board to discuss a whole load of different issues within the national park and how we're going to take those forward in the next National Park Partnership Plan, to then produce a draft in early summer to then formally consult on in the autumn time next year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Grant. Questions from John Kirk, followed by Lauren McCallum. John.
Yeah, Grant, thank you. I'm looking here at mobile apps for this, mobile apps for that. How vulnerable are we to cyber attacks? Have we got stuff in place? Because it's quite frightening how the world is turned around and all this cyber attacks going on.
Yeah, well, we are cyber essentials plus. I'm looking for Luke. He's legged it. The one person that could have told me exactly what we are. But I think we're cyber security plus. We've got all the credentials now. We're all in place. So we are as secure as we can be on the cyber side of things. Obviously, quite a lot was learnt on the back of the issues that SEPA had a number of years ago, where they had always a big attack, and that led to a lot of work being done across the public sector. So we are as good as we can be, John, on that. I would never say never, though, when it comes to these things, because it seems to develop every day. Is another thing around these things, and it's one of these things that we just got to be aware of and try and make sure we were doing the right things.
Thank you, Lauren.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I think everything in terms of the timeline seems sensible to me, and just on the kind of consultation fatigue, totally hear that, and even in the NGO sector, just across society, I think consultation fatigue is massive. But I think there's a real opportunity for us to not make consultation like watching paint dry, because actually consultation a lot of the time is about what the kind of future you want to see and the sort of community you want to live in and the type of places you want to access and how that looks. And I know, I'm not saying the National Park does this, but in previous experiences of mine, you know, you put on an event, you supply some free beer, and then all of a sudden people will want to rock up. And I just feel that there's a real opportunity, especially with something like with the partnership plan, to really kind of be quite creative about consultation, and actively seeking out, you know, different types of communities and tailoring those consultation events to them. So yeah, I guess it was maybe not so much of a question, but just a bit more of a comment, really.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things we're very keen to do is to build on the sort of work that we're doing through Cairns 2030. So, I mean, this past week we've been in Strathdon, where we had a meeting with the Silver Circle, which is the sort of the old people's group within Strathdon. We had the creatives workshop as part of that with people in Strathdon, and then we had a drop-in session for people to come in and find out over 6-7 hours all the different things and get opinions on lots of different things. It'll be things like that we do. I mean, it won't be badged as a National Park Partnership Plan consultation event. I think that's the point I'm trying to get across. It will be when we're doing lots of events, which we will be doing anyway. We will be trying to gather as much information that's useful to developing a park plan as part of that. I don't think we'll be doing something we say come along and find out about the park plan, because that is a bit like watching paint dry. So we'll be trying to do that as part of the overall approach to engaging with people on a range of things. Because you're right, I mean, it's interesting stuff about the future, and we need to do that. So we've got more coming up. We'll be looking, there's an event that we're looking to put in place in Aviemore coming up, and we're at the Ballater Winter Festival, and that's just this side of Christmas, and then there'll be another whole range of things next year as well. So it's that sort of thing where we will be using as much as possible other people's events as well to go along to the right and talk to people in their places rather than ask them to come to our places.
Yeah, points very well made, Lauren. On that consultation issue, Ollie Davis, followed by Fiona McLean and Chiva Blackett. Ollie.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Yeah, I think Grant's covered most of what I was going to say, Lauren. But yeah, as part of that Cairngorms 2030 engagement piece, there's a specific strand around testing new methods, different ways of doing things. So we've actually tasked the team as part of this, with this agreement, to go away and come up with something that's more innovative and engaging for a range of different audiences. So hopefully we'll start seeing that frame out over the next few months.
Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you. The timetable looks sensible to me. I suppose I have a slight concern about capacity to deliver on this, given Cairngorms 2030 is in full swing at the moment, and I would hope that we can consider how we can build on the current partnership plan as much as possible, rather than start devising something completely new. And I also feel that we certainly need to be considering how it will fit with external funding opportunities, which we need to be identifying right now in order to capitalise on leveraging known Scottish Government funding as best as we can.
Thank you, Fiona. Chiva Blackett.
Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of developing thoughts as we go along, which is always a bit of a worry. But I've spoken about the lack of childcare, and Grant asked who we should be consulting with. Well, what group should we have? And I think that the parent councils in the park are probably quite important to engage with. And Jackie spoke about people creating businesses. If more people were encouraged to become childminders, that would help. But it's not seen as a business, or certainly not in Deeside, where I have tried to, because we've got no nurseries, and in England you get free childcare at 2. In Scotland you have to wait till 3. And I've got a daughter who would love another child. She lost one and she had one, and she'd love another one, but the two-year-old they're still having to pay nursery for, and they can't afford to have another one, and soon she's going to be too old. I've got another daughter in England who wants to move up into the national park with her twins, but their twins are 2 and there is no free childcare. So I think we need to engage with that demographic in particular to discover why it's failing in this partnership plan, if that makes sense, and how you do that, given Lauren's very valid point of consultation overload. I don't know. I think we're going to have to be creative, but those are the people that we need to understand.
I think that, I mean, absolutely, in terms of engaging with different audiences and on the topics, I think the one bit that we've got to, and I suppose this is what we'll do over the next year, is decide what is in effect something that is national park related, or something where it might be better suited for a community planning partnership, or it might be better suited for a different vehicle to be the lead on that, rather than the national park plan being the key document around that. And I think that's just one of the things I think we've got to be careful that we don't end up trying to say that the national park plan will cover everything that happens in the national park. Where there are key links between things, absolutely, but we might need to say, look, that's a really important issue, but that is something that, you know, a health and social care partnership or a community planning partnership is the better vehicle to actually deliver on that than a national park is. So we just need to have a think about those. So it's all these topics that will no doubt come forward. But the point being about talking to people in these different groups about these things, and to find out what are the key issues that they would like to see resolved. But I think we've also got to be a bit clearer about what we think the national park's role is in some of these things, and where we don't have a role in them.
Thank you. Steve Micklewright, followed by John Kirk. Steve.
Yeah, just a quick one, Grant. This change to facilitate the implementation of blah, blah, blah. Should that affect the process that we go through, or will it affect the process in terms of talking to other agencies that the plan will now influence? So is the process going to change in the light of that?
So, I mean, we always do a lot of work with all the different organisations. I think it will probably make the public agencies or the public sector as a whole, what's the best way I can put this? They might care more about exactly what's in the plan if they have a statutory duty to help the implementation of it, rather than just have regard to it. Because have regard is always quite a loose term in terms of you can have regard to something and still not do it. This time, if we put it in there, people have a duty to actually help implement it. So I suspect that there will be a bit more scrutiny from the public sector about what is in there, and thus what they might be required to do within the national park that might be different to what they're doing if you're a national organisation nationally.
Yeah, and Andy Ford on that point.
I just wanted to add very briefly, I think the real strength in that as well is the ability for the public sector, the public agencies to speak with more clarity with one voice. If we have greater alignment through the National Park Partnership Plan, then we can, as I say, speak with one voice and give more clarity to land managers around what the multiple objectives are, and pull people less in different directions by different agencies' priorities, because there is more alignment around the park plan.
Thanks, Andy. John Kirk, followed by Mike Williamson.
This is just an observation made, just probably being a farmer doesn't look at these things, but I was on holiday last week, and what really shook me was the amount of money spent by the Silver Pound. The amount of retired folk in Yorkshire, and every town you went to was packed with old folk spending money, and I think it's something we've got to recognise as well.
Thanks, John. Mike?
Yeah, I just really wanted to come back and correct Jeeva on your comment about childcare. I believe you can get childcare from the age of 2 if there is a need, but otherwise it's 3 and it's 11:40 hours. But I think by and large it goes back to the comments that Gavin was making earlier about our population and the demographics of that population, the age groups, and how we attract people to come and live and work in the area to try and support these services that we're all looking for.
Thank you very much. Are there any other points on the paper? Looking round. None. So taking on board the point about starting to think about groups that can contribute to this process, is the board content to agree the timetable for the development of the National Park Partnership Plan 2027-2032? Thank you very much. And at this point, we'll stop for a comfort break and resume at 11:30. Thank you. Right, thank you, members. Moving on to item 9, paper 5, the agricultural land use and farming activity paper. This is for discussion, and the board is being asked to note the overall picture of farming activity, trends and predictions for the future. And members will remember that this big piece of work was requested by the board, given the significance of farming and crofting to the lives of so many people who live and work in the national park, and all the vital interests connected with the sector. I hope members agree it was very well worth the effort. The paper sets out an important overview of farming and crofting in the park over the past 20 years based on June census data. The information gives us preliminary context on agriculture in the park, how systems have changed, and some of the influences which have driven those changes, identifying the key challenges for the sector in the future, and it'll help frame discussions with the agricultural community on what the next partnership plan can do or should focus on, and just as important, what it can't do. A follow-up paper setting out the funding going into agriculture will come to a future board meeting. The paper is introduced by Colin McLean, Head of Land Management, and Malcolm Smith, our agricultural advisor, who both put a power of work into producing it. So thank you in advance of the presentation and discussion. Over to you, Colin and Malcolm.
Thank you, Sandy, and morning all. Farming is clearly a vital activity in the National Park. It shapes the landscape, the ecology and the economy. There will clearly be a section on farming within the next park plan, and we would like this paper to initiate discussion amongst the board as to the content of that section. So the overarching objectives of agricultural policy in Scotland are set out in the Agricultural and Rural Communities Act of last year. These are sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices, the production of high quality food, protection of animal health and welfare, and on-farm nature restoration, climate mitigation and adaptation. Future rural payments will be designed to support the delivery of the objectives in that Act, and they will likely be an evolution of the payments that currently exist. So supporting farmers in delivering the objectives in the Act will form a key part of the next park plan. The current objective in the current plan relating to farming is to work with farms to reduce their carbon footprint, conserve soil carbon, encourage sustainable production, and deliver increased biodiversity on in-by land. And the plan recognises that agricultural land also plays an important role in the delivery of nature networks and in species conservation. So this paper describes current agricultural support systems and describes how farming is carried out in the Cairngorms. It sets out how the Park Authority has interacted with agriculture in the past in various ways, including through the post of Agricultural Advisor, through setting up the Farmers Forum, through various conservation projects on farms, support through the Climate Adaptation Fund, and an enhanced beaver mitigation scheme. The Park Authority has set up the Cairngorms Agricultural Advisory Group, which brings a range of interests together to provide advice to us on farming. We attend the meetings of the Cairngorms Crofters and Farmers Group and have farming projects within the Cairngorms 2030 programme. The paper then looks at the changes in farming between 2003 and 2023. Headline messages are a reduction in holdings, a reduction in agricultural land, which is mirrored by an increase in woodland on agricultural land, but that's on hill land rather than in-by. A reduction in sheep numbers, which is around half of what has occurred nationally, and a reduction in cattle numbers, which is roughly double what has occurred nationally. The agricultural workforce has marginally increased, at least partly due to increased income streams, for example, holiday cottages on farms. Finally, the paper looks at future challenges, which include changes to payment systems, an increased emphasis on greening measures, environmental challenges, including flooding and drought, and market volatility around input costs, which are likely to continue. As I said at the start, the purpose of this paper is to stimulate discussion around farming and the measures to support farming in the National Park Plan, and we would welcome your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. A first question from John Kirk.
Thanks, Colin. There's been a lot of work put into this. Farming is changing, there is no question about it. Diversification is becoming a big part of farm incomes. We're probably into a period where less is more, where folk are keeping less stock and trying to do them better and probably take them through to FOT. So there is a big change in the rural area in this part of the world. There's a couple of things that the big worry for most farmers in our part of the world is the beaver and any damage done in the future. But we've been there before, we know what that is. There's another couple of points I'd like to raise. Over the years, there's less and less ground getting ploughed, and there's less and less lime going on. It seems to be a big change. I know in our heyday, we used to plough 600 acres a year, and I could see it year on year falling, the amount of ground that was getting ploughed. And then that reflected in our silage stuff, what we did at silage time. A lot of the farms, there was getting less and less bales because the grass wasn't getting renewed and we're sitting with all this old grass in it. So, and there is also a pro and con for nature there, where the ploughed land was also a good area for ground nesting birds. And I think we've got to watch what's happening, with the lack of ploughing and grass getting too old. That's part of my observation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, I'll come back on that, John. Yeah, I agree with you that that has been a changing thing in the last few years. That we ourselves are experimenting with Mintel and re-establishing grass through that way. And as we're forced to look at carbon and ways to save fuel and various things like that, I haven't noticed that reduction in yield as yet, but yeah, it's something that we'll be keeping an eye on. But I think, well, you know yourself, cutting costs is one of the main ways that we need to develop our businesses and make them more resilient.
John?
But just one other thing. The age of the folk in the industry is another big worry. It's back to the silver pound again. We're silver farmers as well. I think we have to do as much as possible, and maybe to try and encourage estates to let ground to younger people. This is really, really critical to our future.
Well, yeah, you know yourself, that's been my problem as well, is getting access to ground and trying to find a way into farming for my boys, and very fortunate that this job came along and I could take a step back and just let them work with what we've got. But looking for opportunities in other areas is definitely something that it would be good to encourage big estates to try and look at the next generation that are coming forward.
Thanks, Malcolm. Questions from Peter Cosgrove, Duncan Miller, Eleanor McIntosh, and Mike Williamson. Peter.
Thank you. I'd first of all like to say this is hugely welcome. It's an incredibly important piece of work, and having a good baseline on which to make decisions and discuss where to go in the future is pivotal to being effective. So I'd like to thank the staff who've done this work, and I appreciate that there was a lot of difficulty getting some of the data, and I also understand the caveats associated with the use of some of that data. So it is hugely welcome. And when I asked this question a couple of years ago when I came on the board, I really wanted to see something like this, so thank you. Second question, it's a little bit left field, and it relates to sort of market volatilities which you pick up on in the plan. And I was struck, because I've been doing work outside of the park, so this is not in relation to park estates, just the role that potential tax changes that are being mooted nationally can have, particularly around inheritance tax. And I'm looking, and I've been working on several estates where agriculture production in terms of rough grazing and sheep have purely been kept on ground simply for inheritance tax purposes. And were that tax system to be tweaked, whether that's taking that away or allowing for, say, rewilding or more restoration without animals on it, that could fundamentally impact quite rapidly how some estates treat and work with agriculture. Do you have a handle in the park on the sort of proportions, or whether that's a big consideration on land holdings or not.
Colin.
Okay, second time. We don't have that information. I suspect it might be quite difficult to get that information honestly on a questionnaire, for example. But tax is obviously a key motivation for land management across the board, and tweaks in tax systems can have quite major influences in how land is managed. We've seen that historically, so it's certainly something we'd be keen to explore, but we don't have the information at the moment.
Andy Ford on that point.
Yeah, I'll just follow up quickly with a piece of work that we're doing through Cairngorms 2030 in the south of the park, which is looking at business resilience and looking at some of the vulnerabilities and some of the changes coming towards land-based businesses. This is being led by the land managers, I should add, who are starting to identify the impacts on their land-based businesses of changes in policy, changes in payment schemes, which result in a change in income streams, etc. And also, we've been talking a lot about rural skills, what a workforce strategy might look like to help land-based businesses deal with some of those vulnerabilities, or at least try and build some resilience into their businesses against that. And I think inheritance tax would be a really important point to introduce, but I think it needs to come, and it will come, from the businesses as we start talking to them about how is your business changing in the light of changing policies, in the light of changing legislation, etc. So I think we can tease it out of that work, but I think we can tease it out in a much bigger land-based business sense, which agriculture will be a part of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Duncan Miller.
Yeah, thanks for this, and I think it's a pretty fair representation of kind of the direction of agriculture in the park. So I think it sums it all up quite well. And I would just like to say that I think the Park Authority is moving in a positive direction with our sector in the agriculture, with the appointment of Malcolm and the advisory group. So, and yeah, so I think that is positive, and I think it's just to say, keep getting farmers and crofters round the table to have these discussions, and keep them in the loop about these things, because I think that's the best way to keep moving forward in a positive direction with it. I'll echo what John was saying with the aging population. I think that is is a big worry with this, and it's just how we can help encourage younger farmers into the sector and engaging with estates and landowners, and how we can put the two together. And I'm just floating an idea. I don't know if helping young farmers put together robust business plans, because it's completely a changing landscape, that they can then present to landowners, farmers, things. This is because that's quite. Being a farmer is one thing, but also having a business head on is another thing, which is quite difficult. So, yeah, something like that might help. And I was surprised at the total workforce being up. So I just would kind of maybe question: is that kind of number? Is that you said it's accounting for holiday lets and things like that. So is somebody that's doing a changeover, a holiday let on a farm, part of agri-tourism, or is it just tourism? I think that maybe skews the data a wee bit. So, but I don't know the ins and outs of what that encompasses. So,
Malcolm Smith.
Yeah, I think, like I said, the figures are 2 years out of date, but I was surprised by that, the figure for people employed. And I think it would just, like you say, depend on the percentage of work they were doing in the farm as well, because the figures are not that, terribly accurate, I don't think. So, but to go back to it, we were talking about succession earlier. Part of my job plan is to facilitate knowledge sharing events, and because we're trying to tie it up, kind of avoid meeting sickness and too many meetings for farmers to go to, using the Monitor Farm program that we're in, and QMS and RET as well, but all these different organizations, and try and share information with farmers through that. The succession side of things is something that we've been looking at, and quite happy to share any knowledge on that when we can. So yeah.
Thank you, Malcolm. Eldon McIntosh.
Yeah, thanks guys for the figures. I think some of them are questionable, but we have got to start somewhere. And given that we're already working 2 years out of date, it'll be quite interesting to know when and if there's going to be future follow-up data collection, because at least now we've got a baseline to start with. And I know you take the information off the census forums, I think. Some of that recording has changed, and like the employment data, it changed, I think, 2 years ago, the way that you completed that section. So that maybe accounts for what we see as a decline in workforce, yet these figures kind of suggest something different. I think the cattle figures are probably going to be worse now, 2 years later. And the sheep, I was surprised that it was just an 8% drop. I think that might be bigger now as well, but sheep is the one thing that you can dip in and out to quite quickly in a farming business, rather than cattle is much more a long-term get in, get out. So I suppose my question is, what is the plan going forward with this data set, and what is the plan for taking it to the advisory forum? Is there one, and what sort of feedback would you expect from them?
Andy Ford.
Yeah, so as you quite rightly point out, this is a quite rudimentary first cut of data to give members an impression of agriculture in the park and the sort of the main trends and focuses of activity. There is a further piece of work. There's a further piece of work to be done to interrogate the June census data a little bit further and start looking at payments as well into the park in terms of rural payments, EACS payments, etc., to see where we're targeting public money. And I think that then there's a further piece of work on top of that, which is being commissioned in part with Loch Lomond and the Trossachs Park Authority, which then digs into this in more detail. And it's that piece of work, I think, that will really dig into the economy, the socio-economic side of it, because this is just a very basic first cut. And in terms of going back to the agricultural advisory group, so they saw this piece of work, that the June census stuff, and they spoke about it at the last meeting. Well, it was presented at the last meeting, and then we've said in the minutes that we'll go back to them and present the next tranche of data, the next scope of the study to them. So once we get that developed as a formal scope, we'll take that to the agricultural advisory group as well.
Thank you. Mike Williamson, followed by Lauren McCallum. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, convener. My question is about, you say towards the end about the opportunities and challenges facing the agricultural businesses going forward. But one of the things you haven't mentioned is the introduction of future technology, which I should have given John a couple of jelly babies before I asked this question, but which may need that there's more automation within agriculture, and I'm just wondering how significant of that is a fear for the agricultural sector or farmers more generally.
Yeah, I think you're right, but the plus side of the automation is also carbon saving and benefits for the environment through the Climate Adaptation Fund. We funded this year an AI sprayer, which identifies the plants that it's wanting to target as it's going along the field, and we're getting a 90% saving in chemical when you're doing your spraying. I think farming units now are probably at their minimum levels of people work, and I don't think you could farm with any less people. I hope you can't. So I think you still gonna need these people to work these technologies and do the job.
Yeah, I think I'd probably accept that. I think, but from my profession, I used to be a golf course greenkeeper, where you're now seeing fairway mowers that basically just go out and cut the fairways, and there's no personnel involved in any of that. And I think my fear is that some of that technology will actually get transferred into the agricultural industry as it becomes more and more developed, and it will mitigate against the need for more staff. In fact, probably reduce the number of staff who are required on the land. And I just wonder. I think there's challenges there, but I think there's also good opportunities there for the agricultural industry to embrace.
Yeah, well, being an ex-dairy farmer, I remember people talking about robots milking cows, and I was, you'll never get a robot to milk a cow. And lo and behold, here we are, cows milking themselves. But that gives you the opportunity to better manage your farm, or give you the opportunity to do something else with the times.
Thank you, Malcolm. A question from Lon McCallum, followed by Russell Jones, Steve Micklewright, Jackie Brereton, and John Kirk.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just like myself and Eleanor and Duncan were having a really good conversation about just some of the risks, and so the younger farmers coming through. And I know it's really complex. I know there's quite a lot of different assets to it, but just it sounds like a pretty significant risk. And so I guess just trying to give some support to try and get the park to engage with that as much as possible. And also, I guess maybe just more of a comment around the food security. Scotland is not very food secure at all, and would love to see more kind of detail on how we can make the park more food secure, if you like. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Russell Jones.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a specific point in the paper. I just wanted to make the point that I think it's really good that we have this paper at the board, and well done to Malcolm and Colin, no doubt supported by Andy. I think it's a real step forward that we're having these conversations. So well done.
Thank you, Russell. Steve Micklewright.
Yeah, just a quick one, really. I was interesting to read about the whole farm plans, and I was wondering if the park was assisting or supporting farmers that might find that quite onerous or difficult, because it's a new thing. As I don't know if you've got anything to say about that, Malcolm. Be interesting.
The whole farm plan, I find it's a bit of a misnomer. It's not really a plan, is it, Duncan? It's 5 measures that have been set out for people to achieve by 2028, and there is help out there. There's funded help through the Farm Advisory Service, and well, I think there's still funding for some of the plans that are coming off this year as well. So
soil health.
Yeah. So there is help out there for them, but yeah, I would fully support any farmers who want a hand to. I would come round and advise them.
Thank you, Andy Ford, on that point.
Just to add to that, I think one of the questions that we might need to ask as we go forwards with agricultural work is, where does the Park Authority add value? So there will be agents out there doing farm plans and that kind of thing. There's a private sector that's built up around it, and as with all land-based businesses, etc., we have to say, where do we add value? Where are we potentially taking work away from the private sector? Which bits should we focus on or not? There's already a very complicated landscape of support and advice and private contractors, etc., out there, and there may be calls on the park authorities, exactly the point Grant was making before. What's a park plan thing? What's a park authority thing? And what is best served by other bits of an existing network?
Thanks, Andy. Questions from Jackie Brereton, John Kirk, and Jeeva Blackett. Jackie.
Thank you. I was just back on the data issue, really. So one, to say that it's really good to see that women are now making up more than 40% of the workforce. Obviously, that's provided lots more opportunities and is hopefully partly as a result of some of the good work that's been done nationally on women in agriculture and other initiatives. But I just wanted to ask a question on 26, the census data. Might be my reading of it, but the numbers don't tally up. We've got a total of 451 stated in the table in 26, but the figures just add up to 307, I think. Are the missing numbers missing from one of these demographic groups, or have I just read it wrongly? Thank you.
Who wants to pick this up?
I think the answer is none of us want to take this up, but I think I don't actually know the answer to that, and we will have to investigate that. But the trend is quite clear that the majority of farmers are in a more elderly bracket than a younger bracket, and that's a trend not just in the national park. That's right across Europe, really. And there are clearly underlying systemic factors driving that. But yeah, we'll have a look at that data again. Sorry.
We'll have a look at that and we'll write it to the board about what, if there's a clarification needed on that. We'll amend the paper online if there needs to be in terms of that as well.
Those figures were just lifted off of I think it was ARPA website actually, Grant. So
you can dig into that though and see why they don't add up. That's a good question.
There's one thing, and I'm sure Malcolm will agree with me here, and Duncan Elner, the environmental payments dates to suit our area, because they're often not, you have to shut off a field in the middle of lambing, which is not doing any good, but it's causing you severe heartache. And I know a lot of farmers are saying, oh, I'm not going to put that field in because of lambing. The dates are often a month out for this part of the world. So maybe something, as we have a good man in Malcolm here, he knows about it, we could maybe work with the Scottish Government to get some sort of change, because it would be to the benefit of the wildlife if we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Chief Blackett.
Yeah, there's a on page 6 on the chart going down. I'm really puzzled by the line other land, rocks, roads, yards and buildings that's shot up. I don't understand.
the department, when they inspect you to cut down on the amount of money they're paying out, they're quite keen to exclude bits of land. So if you get land that has maybe got too much bracken cover or scree cover, then they exclude that from the areas that you're able to claim. So that was my reading of that. Is that why they're excluding that from your payment and it's going into something else?
But it says rocks, roads, yards and buildings. It doesn't talk about bracken.
So I think it's ineligible land to be speaking about.
It'll also be covered by land that has gone from agriculture into things like housing and other things over 20 years. You know, there'll be, I'm not saying there'll be thousands of hectares of it, but there'll be some of that and roads and things, so that there'll be all those bits put together, I suspect.
But within that 20-year time frame, they done a massive remapping exercise, and that will have changed it dramatically.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments on the paper? No. Thank you very much again. An incredibly big and very important piece of work. Is the board content to note the overall picture of farming activity, trends and predictions for the future? Yep. Thank you very much, board, and thank you very much, Colin and Malcolm, and we look forward to the follow-up paper on funding. We're now at 12 o'clock and we'll stop just now for a short lunch, resuming the formal board meeting at 12:30. Thank you. Hey members, we are resuming our formal board meeting on item 10, paper 6, public sector reform, and this is for discussion. The paper provides an overview of the public sector reform agenda in Scotland and the role the Park Authority will play in delivering this. The board is being asked to note the strategic direction from Scottish Government and to note the place prototype work in the Dee and South Esk catchments as part of the developing public sector reform work. The paper is being introduced by Grant Moyer.
And I realise you'll all be thrilled at public sector reform just after lunch. It's always a topic to get people going. So there's some big work happening in Scotland through the PSR strategy that was set out in June. The paper sets out the sort of main key points around that, but one of the key commitments within that is that Scottish Government and public body corporate costs will be reduced by £1 billion, representing around 20% of the identified public body corporate and core government operating costs. That is not to say that each organisation has to cut corporate costs by 20%. That is saying that across the piece. And then there's obviously work ongoing in terms of what that looks like in terms of budgets and such like for the coming years. And obviously at the moment there's also a spending review happening within Scotland around that for a three-year spending review. So we'll see how that plays out during the winter period as well when that all comes to fruition. There are a number of work streams that are happening across government. And I've sort of highlighted the main work stream around, I suppose, that has direct impact in terms of public bodies, and that's looking at the identification of duplication and potentially where we can share services, the clusters programme, of which we are part of the Environment and Economy Leaders Group cluster, and the potential for any changes within that as we look forward over the next 5 to 10 years. The main driver around public sector reform is really about affordability of public services and quality of public services over the coming period, where we all know there are big cost pressures through an ageing population, which we talked about earlier today in terms of other situations, but in terms of that puts significant cost pressures on things like the NHS and social services and where the funding comes for those, and what that means for the rest of the public service, and at the same time how we can make sure that the services that are provided are as efficient and effective as possible. One of the key things that we're doing is through the EOG group is the work to look at the place prototype side of things. So this is work that's really looking at taking a spatial approach to how public organisations work on the ground rather than a sectoral approach. We have got two prototype areas that we're looking at. One is in the Dee and one is in the Esk. The Esk work is being led by SEPA. The Dee work is being led by us. And within those, we've got the Dee Resilience Group in place. In the Dee side of things, we've got the officer in place, and the SEPA are looking at the same in terms of what they're doing in the Esk. And then that is linked into Scottish Government. And really what the key thing around that is can we use the amount of collective resource, whether that be people and funding, to try and achieve better outcomes more efficiently within those places. So it's a place-based approach, and what we're trying to do with those two is to learn from those and then to be able to see whether we can roll that out into other places, and does it deliver that more efficient and effective public services that we all want to see on the environmental side. So it's not trying to cover everything, it's trying to cover those specific things. There's a second work stream which David Cameron's more involved with, which is looking at sort of some of the wider efficiencies and effectiveness around how public agencies work together, but that's still in development as we look at it. The final bit is just around to say this is building on a lot of work that we're already doing. We do quite a lot of shared services work with Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park Authority. We also provide services to the Scottish Land Commission. And there's been quite a lot of changes happening internally over the past 3 or 4 years within the National Park Authority about how we can make our own services and resources go further. And some of those are in the paper in terms of the internal tech solutions we've found for a number of different things. Obviously, this is a big area for what's happening across. We've got to keep an eye on it. So this is really to bring it to the board's attention in terms of this is where we're at the moment. We'll come back with further reports on what's happening in the Dee through the Performance Committee in due course once we're a little bit further along in terms of actually having something to report. But happy to take any questions on the overall approach to public service reform, where I can answer those at Scottish level, and then obviously a bit more detail about what we're doing within the National Park itself.
Certainly. as has just been discussed, there's an obvious savings element here, but there are real opportunities to drive change in some of our key areas to actually deliver some of our priorities. So we'll go to questions and comments and start with Anne Ross.
Thank you. How is that going to work with the board's work with local authorities, please?
In terms of the work on the D specifically, Anne, or
in general, generically?
Yeah, so I mean, to take the place prototype work on the D, Aberdeenshire Council obviously involved in that. Aberdeenshire Council also sit on the overall work that we do at a Scottish Government level on this as well. Actually, they're the council rep. They don't represent Aberdeen Council. That is linked into COSLA and that side of things in terms of how we take that forward. In terms of overall, I mean, obviously a lot of this is pointed at the services that are directed centrally by Scottish Government, but there's obviously a big bit of work that's happening between central government and local authorities as well about how those efficiencies and effectiveness can also be brought through. And I thought probably the community planning partnerships are probably where that will play out most clearly in terms of that link between the national and the local.
Thank you. A question, John Kirk.
We're at a dangerous stage at the moment with all this things coming forward when we're heading towards an election next year, Grant. What sort of position would we be in?
An excellent question, John. I think I suppose what you can say is that I would suspect that no matter what the composition of the government post May next year, that public service reform and some of the same pressures will be there no matter who is making the political decisions around it. I mean, that whole thing about the amount of funding that has gone into increasing into the NHS year after year is a pressure no matter who's in power, and the ageing population will happen no matter what. So the same sort of pressures there. The solutions that a government may have to that might vary depending on who's in charge next May. But I suppose what we've got to prepare for is that it is likely that an agenda like this will be there post May next year. It might have a different hue to it, but I'd have thought it'd be roughly similar to what they're currently doing.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Lauren McCallum.
Yeah, sorry if I might have misinterpreted some of this, but I wonder if there's an opportunity to kind of ring fence or some of the services with this in terms of like at a national level. So in terms of like, if you think about the Ranger service, and the budget and the financial cost that's going to take, is there an opportunity to kind of ring fence some of that in here so that it's protected? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we don't get to ring fence funding like that. In essence, that's a decision for the board in terms of what we spend our money on when we come forward with the operational plan. The 20% reduction that government is looking for across government is mainly focused on corporate functions, but obviously you need corporate functions to be able to deliver the things you do out in the ground. So even things like the Ranger service, well, all their ways that they put together all the information they do is all based on the IT service that's provided by our corporate functions. So it's not quite as simple as saying you can cut money from corporate and it won't affect frontline. And even if you look at our discussions around fire bylaws, a lot of the work that we're going to do is basically a comms job, which you could say is a back office corporate function. So that's where we're at. But we're going to have to be really careful about how we do all that. So it's not about necessarily ring fencing things. I think it's just making it very clear about what the impacts will be if we end up having to cut in the areas that we know will have an impact on services that we want to deliver.
And the fundamental point behind that is again, we as a board set priorities. Elra McIntosh.
Yeah, we're talking in this about the D and the ESC predominantly because that's what you've got the lead on, but there'll be other bits of work within that 4 work streams that could impact on us. How will we know how that is progressing, and are you able to feed into that bits of work?
So yeah, there's another public sector reform meeting with, so Ivan McKee is the minister that leads on public sector reform in Scotland, and there's another meeting coming up in October, I can't remember exactly when, which is an update on those 4 work streams. And yes, I mean, we will play in across all of those. We will probably do most of the work on the other work streams through our sponsor team and the collective work at Scottish Government rather than as individual organisations. But yeah, there's no doubt that there will be commissions and other things that will come out of those, in which we will probably need to respond in due course as they do that. So yeah, it's all linked together. But we'll certainly, if there's anything that comes up that I think that the board needs to be aware of for strategic impact on the Park Authority, we'll do that through updates to the board.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on the paper? None. So is the board content to note the strategic direction from Scottish Government and to note the place prototype work in the Dee and South Esk catchments as part of the developing public sector reform work? Raymond, thank you very much, and thank you, Grant. Moving on now to item 11, paper 7, environment strategy and land use strategy consultations. So this is for information. Scottish Government are currently consulting on the draft environment strategy and Scotland's 4th land use strategy to be published in March next year. The paper presents the key points the Park Authority wishes to make for public policy and strategy to best support delivery of the National Park Partnership Plan. And the board is being asked to note the key points the Park Authority wishes to make as part of the consultation responses. The paper is introduced by Andy Ford, Director of Nature and Climate Change. Andy.
Thanks very much, Convener. The environment strategy is Scotland's high-level response to the environment, to tackling the twin crisis. The strategy itself is the overarching document or framework, which then points to all of the other strategies, policies and plans that are in place. The strategy will look to see how Scotland makes sure that biodiversity is restored, that Scotland's making its effective contribution to tackling climate change, to minimising pollution, but it also considers Scotland's global impact, its footprint in the international context in terms of import and export, and also things like the net zero and circular economy. So that overarching strategy then points to all of the underpinning ones, like the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy, like active, like travel plans, climate change plan, etc. And our point here is it's really good to see how the alignment must take place across all of those underpinning strategies and be collected towards one overarching vision to support the environment and how the environment supports economies, etc. The land use strategy is the land bit of the environment strategy, and it looks at parcels of land and recognises how each of those can make their contribution to achieving the multiple targets and the overarching framework. We would like it to focus on the multiple benefits that each parcel of land can contribute. And we mentioned before around peatland restoration, needing to demonstrate that the metric here is not just hectares of peatland being delivered. The metric is also about biodiversity, about water quality, etc., etc. So we welcome the plan looking at and highlighting those policy alignments that are necessary in order to achieve multiple benefits. And I guess the other part about it is if we are to make land-based decisions from a regional priorities point of view, then having some data on where the value of the land lies in terms of those trade-offs between multiple benefits, and not saying it's carbon versus trees or carbon versus biodiversity, but actually saying it's a multiple benefit thing. Where does the value come for Scotland? Where does the value come for the national park? Then we think that the land use strategy could do more in terms of helping us make those decisions rather than just pointing out that those decisions need to be made. I think that's probably it.
Thank you very much, Andy. Questions or comments on the paper? Councillor.
I'd just like to support Andy's position about making sure that we're focusing on multiple benefits on the delivery of these elements. In my own work capacity, the last few years I've been working on sites where peatland restoration has been going on and demonstrating the value for rare upland biodiversity. And this has really been underplayed and undervalued, I feel, at a national level, with the value that peatland restoration is delivering to our rare biodiversity. And so it's good to see that our response will be highlighting the multiple benefits of these things, because a lot of the things that we're doing are more than just a one-trick pony. And I think we need to be reiterating that at all stages. So I completely support that approach.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Just to make the point that that the land use strategy is moving in the right direction. I think we're making that point, but it could go much further in actually starting to define and give clearer guidance to resolving issues. But again, those thoughts are contained in the paper. Is there anything else from members?
Grant, just say I think the other key thing for me is that, and it's not so much about what's in the land use strategy, but what it influences, which is that ultimately a land use strategy is only as strong as how it aligns funding and regulation below it. As in, if your funding is pointing at other things, or if your regulation is making people do other things, then it doesn't really matter what your land use strategy says. So there's a big bit of work, I think, for government to think about once they have a land use strategy that is, however that eventually comes out, well, what does that mean for how they are actually funding across, whether that be agriculture, peatland, deer, woodland, whatever you might, where government puts its money into, how are those changing to actually reflect that that's what you're trying to achieve, is that land use strategy? And I think that's a bit that's never quite been done with previous land use strategies. And the same goes for regulation as well. What are you trying to regulate and which way to deliver what? And I think that's where we'd like them to put their thinking into for the future. Certainly, anything that comes out of this in terms of actions that need to be taken forward, there's lots of reviews of different things, but how do they all fit together so that you don't have contradictory bits of funding sort of pointing people in different directions with different amounts of money on the same bit of land, and then asking people to try and make decisions about that. It's quite tricky, so they need to think about those things.
Thank you. Eleanor McIntosh.
Yeah, just on that, Grant, I think that kind of sums it up. If the hierarchy isn't correct, then how does everything fit together? And I think it would solve a lot of issues and give more certainty throughout the land-based businesses if there was a clear, definitive strategy at the top. And I just wonder if we're making that point strong enough in that paper.
You can certainly make that point strong enough in our consultation response.
Yeah, I think that is a central point and point well made. Anything else from members? I think in which case, thank you very much. Is the board content to note the key points the Park Authority wishes to make as part of the consultation responses, that last point to be included? Thank you very much, and thank you, Andy. Moving on to item 12, paper 8, minutes from committee meetings. These are for information. Any points by exception? Thank you. Is the board content to note the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee, the Resources Committee and the Performance Committee, and note the confidential minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee and Resources Committee? Yeah. Thank you again. Any other competent business? None has been notified. Thank you very much. Our next formal board meeting will be on the 28th of November in the Granton-on-Spey office. Thank you, members. Thank you, staff, and those members of the public who've joined us today online. Have a good weekend.